In this tutorial, we're going to be texturing the underside of my Zenvo St1. We're going to be just using a texture that is made from a picture of a real car, the underside of a picture of a real car. This is not actually the underside of the Zenvo St1, but this is an example of how you can texture the underside of your car. There are a lot of different ways that you can do your node setup like I have over here, so it's not really important what you do. You can do a bunch of different things. This was using one node setup, and I'll quickly show you a different node setup that I was using here. This is the second node setup that I came up with. Of course, there are pretty much an endless number of ways that you could set up your nodes to get different results. So I'm just going to be showing you what I did to get these two different setups, and you can do anything else that you'd like to do in order to change these nodes or even the textures themselves to create different results. So for this tutorial, you're actually going to need a couple of different things. The first thing you're going to need is a car model. You can use my car model of the Zenvo St1 if you don't have your own car model, but you are welcome to use your own car model. So you can go to this link. The link will also be in the description. You do need a Sketchfab account, I believe, to download the model. So just make an account if you don't have one, and then log in. And then you can click the download button and you can get this model for free. Once you download it, it's going to show up on your desktop. If you choose to download it to your desktop, it'll show up on your desktop, or it will be in probably your downloads folder or wherever else you have your downloads set to be saved at by default. Mine is on the desktop, so I have this Zenvo St1 folder just like this. You can unpack it or just right click and unzip it, but you actually don't have to. So if you want to leave it just like this, you don't have to unzip it, and you'll actually save space by not unzipping it. So you can just leave it like that if you want to, or you can just right click and do extract all, and then you'll have the unzipped version. But you can leave it like this, it's totally fine, and I'll show you how to use it like this shortly. The next thing we're going to need is GIMP. If you don't have GIMP, go to gimp.org/downloads, and then you're going to scroll down some. It should automatically detect which operating system you have, and then you have two download options. You can download with a BitTorrent, but if you do it this way, it's going to save it as a torrent file, and they do say that you'll need to install a torrent client in order to make use of that file. So if you don't have a torrent client, don't use this option. You should probably use this option instead. So just click on this, download it, and install GIMP. Once you have GIMP installed, we're going to need a plugin for GIMP. And you can get this plugin by going to this web address. It's also going to be a link in the description. And this plugin is called Insane Bump. It's going to do a bunch of different things. You can read through this if you would like to. But basically what it does is it takes a picture and then creates a normal map, a specular map, a diffuse map, ambient occlusion, as well as displacement. And what you're going to do in order to get this is just go down to the bottom, scroll down to the bottom, and this is another description of what all these different things mean. You'll see these different file types once we actually use this. If you're using Windows, you're just going to left click on this. It's going to bring up a pop-up to ask you if you want to download it, and then it's going to download it. And you should have these two files here. It will be the Insane Bump. Well, actually, you should just have this one at first. You'll just have this zipped file, and then when you right click and do extract all, it's going to extract this into two different files. So this one will get extracted, and then you'll have these two files here. In order to know where to place these files, all you have to do is open up GIMP, go to Edit, go down to Preferences, left click on the plus sign next to this Folders option, scroll down some, and then left click on Plugins, and it will tell you which folder your plugins are stored in. It's this top one. Don't worry about the bottom one. It's whatever one's on top. So just remember this, and you're going to have to navigate to this folder. So what you're going to do, if you're on Windows 10 like me, is just left click on the Windows button, scroll down to the bottom, left click on Windows System, and then left click on this PC, click on your C drive, double click, then go to the location that it said. It's usually users, your username, and then GIMP 2.8 or whatever version you're using. And then you're going to go down to plugins, double click on that, and this is where you're going to put your insane bump. I've already got my insane bump plus this DLL. If you don't have yours yet, I'm just going to close this because we don't need this, and then minimize this. What you're going to do once you get to the file location that has your plugins, all you're going to do is you're going to take these two files here, and then you're just going to left click and drag them both into this file, and then that should be it. But since I've already done it, I'm not going to do it. You should have the insane bump application and this DLL as well in this folder once you're done, and then you can close this. I'm going to move these back over to here. So now we have a car model, we have GIMP, and we have the insane bump add-on. Now we basically just need a texture. You can use any texture that you want to use. This one just happens to be free, and it has a Creative Commons public domain license, so it can be used anywhere for any purpose. So you're just going to go to this link. Again, this will be in the description. It's going to download it as a 7-zip file, so we will need 7-zip in order to make use of this file, but we'll be getting 7-zip after this if you don't have it already, so don't worry about that. All of this stuff is free, so there's no worry about having to pay for anything. So all you're going to do is just left click on this, and it's going to bring you to where you can download it, or it's actually just going to start downloading it. Then you're going to have this file on your desktop, but it is a 7-zip file, so you'll need 7-zip in order to extract these files. So we're going to go to 7-zip. If you don't have 7-zip, go to this link that's in the description, or you can just go to 7zip.org. You will need to know if you have a 32-bit system or a 64-bit system. In order to figure that out, you can just left click on search, type in system, and then click on system information, and it will say which system type you have. If you have a 64 based system, it'll say x64. If you have a 32-bit system, it should say x86. So this will tell you which one you're supposed to be using. If it says x64, you're going to download this one. If it says x86, you're going to download this one. Alternatively, you can just type in system and left click on system, and it will show you which type of operating system you have. A third way to do this would be to hold the Windows key and press R. So Windows then R, type in msinfo32 and either press enter or click OK. And this will bring you to the same system information box that we saw with the first method. It's just another way to get there in case you're using Windows 7 or a different Windows operating system. Once you've downloaded it, you'll have this file, so just run it and this is the installer, so just double click on it and install it just like you would anything else. Once you're done with installation of 7-zip, you can right click on this, go to 7-zip, and you can either do extract files or you can extract them here. Whichever one you choose, it's going to extract the files, and then you'll have this file here. So now you should have your car file, you should have the pictures of the underside of the car, you should have Insane Bump installed, and you should also have GIMP ready and installed as well. The next thing I would recommend doing is making a folder to keep all these things. So I usually just save all my stuff in my art stuff and my Blender stuff. And I'm going to save it in my cars folder, and this one's a tutorial, so I'm going to save it here. I've already created a folder, and this is where I'm going to save all of my stuff. So you just want to make a folder wherever you feel like saving all of these things, and then you can drag the car model and the car underside pictures into that folder. The rest of these things don't have to go in the folder. So I'm going to drag this one into my folder because I haven't done that yet. So I'm just going to drag this into here. That should be fine. I've already dragged in my car underside one, but you're going to want to do that. Just left click and drag it in the same way I did with the other one. So you're just going to take it. You can move it up there if you want. Left click and drag it in here, and then just release the mouse button and it will drag it into here. But since I already have it, I'm going to just close this, rename this, and then drag it in so that's exactly the same as yours. So now we have our car model and our pictures of the underside of the car. We can take a look at these if we want to. This first one is a picture with the tires here. You can still see that, and the underside of the wheel arch, or the wheel well, I should say. The second one has those removed. You can see that the tire was removed, and so was the white part over here for the underside of the wheel well. And this third one is sort of removing this blue tint, it seems. So I'm going to close this, and you can choose whichever picture you want to use. The one that I got the best results with, I think, was this one. So the next step is just to open up GIMP. The next thing we want to do is copy this picture, so we're just going to left click on it, then do Control C to copy. We're going to right click and create a new folder, and we're going to name this Insane Bump Textures and press enter. Then we're going to go into this folder and paste, so we're going to do Control V to paste that picture. You can click on this button so you can see the picture. And then we're going to left click and drag it into GIMP. That will load it into GIMP. Now we're just going to go to Filters, Map, and choose Insane Bump. Assuming you installed the Insane Bump correctly, you should have this option. If you don't have this option, then you need to make sure that you take these two files and put them in the correct location, just like I showed you before. If you've put them in the correct location and you've restarted GIMP, you should be able to go to Filters, Map, and Insane Bump. You can see the progress bar down at the bottom. Once it's done, you'll see the previews here for the displacement, the diffuse, the occlusion map, stuff like this. These are the previews of the maps that just got created. You can also change these settings. You can change it from no to yes by just left clicking and vice versa. You can remove the lighting. You can make it HD, which in this case kind of makes it more of a square image rather than a rectangle like it is now. But you can feel free to adjust some of these settings, such as, inverting the height map if you feel that's necessary. You can change this AO value up and down, which will affect this particular map in this case. But I'm just going to leave the settings at default, but you are welcome to change them and see how the results go for you. And then you can just click on execute. Once you've done that, it's going to save all of these maps in the same folder where your original texture was. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do execute. And that's why we created a new folder specifically for this picture here, because I wanted all of these pictures to be saved in that one specific folder. Otherwise it just loads up whatever folder you have with a bunch of pictures, and it can be a little confusing. So we moved this picture to its own folder, and then we clicked on execute, and it automatically created all of these different pictures for us. I'll just quickly go over what these different pictures are. So the _A, this is the AO, or the occlusion map, whatever you want to call it. Ambient occlusion is what this A one is. D is for the diffuse, so it would be this one right here. The H is actually the height map, which is also the displacement map. HN stands for high normal, and it is one of the normal versions that this add-on creates. There's also the low normal and mid normal or medium normal. And then there's just a regular normal one right here. So there's 4 different normal maps that it creates. My 2 favorites out of these, at least for the example we're going to be looking at, are this high normal and this mid normal. They seem to give the best results, but you can play around with these other 2 if you'd like to. The S is for the specular map, and this, I believe, is the specular normal map. I'm not 100% if that's what it stands for, but it's something like that, like something to deal with specular, I believe. The ones we'll be using mostly are the diffuse. We'll be using the ambient occlusion. You can use the height map, and you also want to, in most cases, use one of these normal maps, one of these 4 normal maps, and we'll use a specular as well. So in order to put this to use, we're going to open up Blender, but first we can actually just close down GIMP. We're done with GIMP, so we can close this. You can close this as well. You don't need to save any of the changes, just discard the changes. We've already got our maps saved right here, so we don't need to save anything. And we can also get rid of all these other things here. So if you've already installed Insane Bump, these are probably gone. If you left click and drag them in, they should have automatically moved to the other folder. So I'm just going to delete these because I don't need these. So I'm going to delete them. And I can also delete these. So if you've already installed 7-zip, you can delete this one. And this one was just the 7-zip file for the car underside. So I'm going to delete all these because I don't need them anymore. In order to open up our car file, we're just going to go back to where these textures were, assuming you saved it here. And I'm going to go up a couple folders, and I saved my Zenvo St1 right here. As mentioned before, you can leave it as a compressed file and still open it up. So we're just going to left click, or double left click, and then double left click again, and then one more time. So even though this is a compressed file, you can actually still open up this Blender file, so that's one interesting thing to be aware of. When it opens up, you should have this. I'm going to go ahead and close my tool panel here just by pressing T, and that's going to close that. You can also just left click and drag on the edge here, and that will close it as well. And I'll turn on screencast keys. I'm just going to open up this here. This is not a required step. This is just so you can see which keys I'm pressing over here. And then I'll close this panel by pressing the N key. So this is the file you'll have when you first start out. As mentioned before, you can also use your own car model, and you should be able to use it just fine. So on this car, what I did is just make a relatively flat bottom to this. So this method of using a texture is good for a car that has just a relatively flat bottom, no real details on the bottom, and the detail is going to be from the texture. So you're not intending to model anything, you're really just relying on the texture to add a detail in this area. In order to do that, we're going to have to UV unwrap this. So we're actually going to go up here where these little diagonal lines are. We're going to left click and drag to the left. That's going to open up a new window here. Then we're going to left click down here and choose UV Image Editor. You can zoom in a little if you want. Then we're going to right click on the car, tab into edit mode, and I'm actually just going to change the size of this a little bit by just left clicking and dragging. So what you want to do if you're using your own car model is you want to isolate the bottom. In this case, it's a completely separate object, so if I left click on one of these faces, or right click actually, and then press L, it's going to select the entire bottom because I've already created this as a completely separate object. If you're using your own car and it's actually all one piece, like for example if this bottom was actually physically connected to the rest of the car, what you would want to do is press T to open up your tools panel here. You would want to go to shading and UVs, and you're going to have to mark some seams similar to how I've done in other tutorials, where you would just want to select all the outer edges along here and do that for the entire bottom. So you'd want to go around the outside in edge select and select all the edges, and then once you have the entire outside selected, you would do mark seam, and then you could go to face select and select one of these faces and press L. And it would do a selection similar to this because it would be limited by the seams. So you would not be selecting anything that's beyond the seams, and you would have a similar selection to this. From this point, all we have to do is unwrap this, but I'm going to show you why this is going to be a little bit of a tricky problem here. So we're just going to press U and then choose unwrap. And you'll notice in the unwrap we actually have only half of the bottom, and that's because we have this mirror modifier here. Usually when you're making cars you're going to use a mirror modifier, but if you want to texture the bottom of the car, as you'll notice in our pictures here, I'm just going to go back to where we saved our pictures. It doesn't really matter which one you look at. But you'll notice that it's not the same on the left and the right. So you have differences on the left side and the right side, and it's the same up here. You've got, different things on the left and the right. So you can't use a texture or a mirror in this case. You can't have a texture that's mirrored, otherwise it's not going to look correct. So we actually have to get rid of the mirror modifier so we can keep these differences in detail on the left and right side of our picture. So what we're going to do is we're going to press tab with our mouse over here to go back to object mode. And we're going to apply the mirror modifier by just clicking on apply. Then go back here, tab back into edit mode. We still have the bottom selected, so we're going to unwrap this again by pressing U and choosing unwrap. Now you'll see we actually have both sides of the underside of the car, which will allow us to use the left and right sides of this picture instead of having it mirrored. Another thing I want to do in this case is to rotate this. So we're going to press R and then 90 and press enter. And if we want to move this up and have it perfectly matching up with the edges of this, this square here, we can go to UVs and constrain to image bounds. Just left click on this, then do G and then Y and then left click, and now it's perfectly situated from top to bottom. Next, what we want to do is load in our image, and an easy way to do that is to just go into the node editor and do it there. But first what we want to do is create a new material for this bottom, because I actually don't have a material for the bottom separately on this car. So we're going to go to the materials tab here, just left click on this. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom and then click this plus button, and then we'll click on new to create a new material. We're going to left click here and give this a new name. We'll call this the undercarriage. That's the technical term for the bottom of the car. I'm also going to give it a darker color to match the bottom of the car. And I'm also going to change the viewport color to a darker color as well. Now we can go over here, left click, and change this to the node editor. You'll see we have these nodes here. You can just zoom in on them. In order to get our texture in here, the easiest way to do that is just to go to where we saved our textures. I'm going to go into this Insane Bump Textures folder, and we want to get the diffuse texture so that we can plug it into the diffuse shader here. So we're just going to left click on this, left click and drag, and then drop it over here, and that's it for that. So we can bring this over a bit by just left clicking and dragging, and then left click on the color and put it in the color slot for the diffuse part of the texture, and then this picture is automatically loaded in. So the reason we wanted this picture loaded up is so that we can actually see it here and determine where we should be moving our UVs. So we can just left click here and then choose that picture, and now all of a sudden we have that picture. And you can see we kind of want these to be over here, so we're going to need to scale it on the x-axis some. So we're going to do S and then X. That's going to scale on the x-axis, and we'll bring this out until it reaches the end. And if you want to, you can even select some of these areas here, or just select one of these vertices, B to box select, and then do G and then Y and bring this down some. And you could even scale it on the y-axis by doing S and Y and scaling it here. But that's really up to you, and it's going to be different depending on which car model you're using, how exactly you set this up. And this isn't intended to be a perfect setup, so just do something that you feel is correct. And I'm actually going to go down here to UVs and turn off this option. So I'm just going to go to UVs and left click on this, because I actually want to move these by selecting one, B to box select, then do G, then Y. I want to move these down. and out away from all the rest of this stuff, because the bottom of these parts are actually right here, and it actually shouldn't have any of this texture stuff. So I'm just getting it away from the texture so it won't have any strange things on these two parts of the car. So now we have our UVs set up. We can always change these if we feel we need to. Now we're just going to set up our material. So we're going to go back to the node editor. And at this point, since we're done with this for the most part, you can actually change it to the 3D view. And you can get a view of your car here. You can make this bigger by left clicking and dragging. You can close this window by pressing N with your cursor over here. And at any point you can always change this to the rendered view. However, what we should do first is activate our lights. So we're just going to press tab to go to object mode. So you should be in object mode. And we're going to bring this over a bit so we can see all of our layers and things. So this first layer has our car, and in this case this layer has our lights. So if I click on this layer, all these planes are responsible for lighting the scene. So we're going to left click on this first layer that has our car, and we're going to hold shift and left click on the light layer. So we now have our car showing, and we also have our lights showing. One thing about this setup that I'm actually going to be changing is when we change this to rendered mode, we can see that our lights actually get rendered in the viewport, and it would be convenient to not have that be true. So we're going to change this back to solid, and we're going to select one of our lights. This one's fine. And we're going to go to this object panel. So we're just going to left click on this. We're going to scroll down some. We're going to change this from textured to wire. That just shows the wireframe in the viewport, so we can actually see through it. So you can see the difference here. This just allows us to see through this this plane here. And we also want to left click on cycle settings, bring this down some, and under ray visibility we want to turn off the camera. That means when we actually render it, so if we go to rendered view, you're not seeing this plane anymore, but it is still actually emitting light onto the car just as it would normally. If we turn this back on, you'll see this plane when we render. So you can see why we want to turn this off. So we're going to turn it off. We're going to change this back to solid view. And we want to do the exact same thing for the rest of these lights. So just select them, change this to wire, and turn off the ray visibility for the camera. And do the same for the rest of these. Another thing I want to do for this particular model is to duplicate this one and then rotate it so that it's giving light to the bottom of our scene. Initially I did not plan to have the bottom of the car being lit, but in this case we want it to have lighting so we can see the end result of the bottom texture. So we're going to duplicate this plane by first selecting it and then doing Shift D to duplicate, and then right click to cancel. We're going to tab into edit mode. We're going to do Shift S, cursor to center, and then we're going to do R, Y, and then 180. We're going to change this to 3D cursor, and then we're going to do R, Y, 180, and then press enter. That's going to rotate 180 degrees around the y-axis based on the position of the 3D cursor. And then we can tab back into object mode. We can select our car by right-clicking. And if you render, you'll no longer see the lights in the scene. And if you go to the bottom of the car and you render, you'll now see something very simple for the bottom of our car. That's pretty much it for the setup of this. So we're just going to left click and bring this over, because now we're going to be focusing more on the nodes here. So we have our image texture loaded in, we have our diffuse here. One reason why it didn't show up actually, or why this image texture didn't show up on the bottom of our car, is because we haven't assigned it to the bottom of the car yet. So we're going to press tab to go into edit mode, go to the materials tab, and then click on assign. That will assign this texture to all of the selected faces, which in this case is the bottom of the car. So now if we were to render this, or first if we go into object mode by pressing tab, and then we switch to rendered view, we can start to get a look at what the bottom of the car is going to look like. This is just the diffuse texture at the moment, so we don't have anything special showing up here. It's just a simple texture. So we're going to change this back to solid view, and we want to make use of some of the other textures that we have here. First, we want to take this ambient occlusion texture, just left click on it, left click and drag and bring it over to here. I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to use an ambient occlusion texture, but I'm going to show you one method that I kind of researched and looked at. Although I'm not an expert on how to use different types of textures, this one seemed to work out fine. So we're just going to go with this, and feel free to comment about better ways to use any of these textures, because I'm not a texture expert by any means. So now we need to go to add, and we're going to go to color and choose mix RGB. Bring this over here until this is orange, and then left click. That'll automatically put the color into color slot 1. And we're going to take this color and put it into color spot 2. So it's going to mix our diffuse texture with our ambient occlusion texture. But instead of actually mixing it, we want to left click here and change this to multiply. And that will be it for that. So now we're going to take in one of these other textures. We're going to take the specular. So we're going to left click here, drag it in, and that will bring in our specular. In order to make use of this, we're going to click on add. We're going to go to shader, and we're going to choose mix shader, and then left click here. The purpose of our specular texture is going to be to determine when we should use a diffuse texture and when we should use a glossy texture, because we're going to be connecting this to a glossy node, which we can do now. So we're just going to go to add, shader, and glossy, just so we have a visual representation of what's going to happen. And we're going to drag this into the bottom shader. So this specular texture is going to be the factor which determines when we're going to use the diffuse texture and when we're going to use the glossy texture. If you want to, in order to make changes to this specular texture, you can add in another node by going to add, color, and RGB curves, and then bringing it up until this line is orange and left clicking. So you can adjust the curve of this, but first we're just going to look at what it looks like without making any sort of adjustments. So we have this now. And you're free to adjust the curves here to be whatever you would like them to be. I found something like this kind of works fine for this example, but you're free to do whatever you would like to do in this case. From here you have many options. As I talked about before, we have a lot of different choices for the normal map, and we also have a height map that's available to us. So you're free to try out all of these. So what we're going to do, actually, we're just going to take one of these two because I found these work the best. And we're just going to take this, drag and drop. You can take any of these, as I explained before, and just give them all a try if you'd like to. So this is going to be our normal map. Usually with normal maps you want to change this from color to non-color data. So just left click, change it to non-color data so that it's not affecting the color of our car model. And in order to use a normal texture, you're going to need to add in a normal node or normal map node. So go to add, vector, and normal map, and we'll add this in here, and we'll take the color and plug it into the color, and take the normal and plug it into the normal of our glossy shader. And we actually want to take the normal and plug it into the normal of our diffuse shader. I'm just going to reposition some of these nodes so that there's more space down here for us to do other things. So now we can take a quick look at this and see what we're dealing with. So this is what we have at the moment. But if you want to make adjustments to this, if you want to make adjustments to your normal map, you can of course add in a color ramp. So go to add, converter, color ramp, and then add it in here when this is orange, and it will automatically set everything up for you. It'll connect the color to the factor and the color to the color. So now you may want to leave this on rendered and then just adjust these values. I found it works best if you switch the white and black. So if you take this and left click and drag it past the black one, and then bring this one over slightly, something like this ends up giving you reasonably decent results on the bottom. Another thing we can do is make use of this height map instead. So we can just left click on this, left click and drag it in to our nodes here. So this is kind of an either or thing, like you either use your height map or you use your normal map. I don't think you would ever really use them both at the same time. I could be wrong, but I think it's kind of just an either or thing. So we're going to do something similar. We're going to use this height map as if it was a normal map, but we're going to use a few different nodes here. We're going to select this normal map. We're going to do Shift D to duplicate, bring this over here. I'm actually going to reposition this one over to there, and then select the color ramp, Shift D to duplicate, bring it over here so we can also use a color ramp for this. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll just connect in the values just like we did before. One thing we're going to do differently is we're going to go to add, vector, and choose bump. So we're going to use a bump map. And I'm running out of space, so I'm actually just going to move all these over. You can use B to box select and then G to move these over. And bring this one over here. And connect this into the normal output. So instead of using this one here, we can use this one here. I'm actually just going to reposition these again just to make this a little easier. So this one would go here as well as over here. And then you can take a look at the result of that. Not the greatest, but we can make adjustments to make it look a lot better. For this one on the color ramp, I found it's good to just keep this all the way down. And actually we want to switch the position of these, so we want the white one to be on the right and the black one to be on the left. So we're going to grab the white one, bring it to the right, bring this one to the left, and then move this one over till it's pretty close. These are the settings that I kind of figured out that work pretty decently. You can also adjust the strength here, but let's first just take a look at this. So this is kind of what we have, but you can take the strength and change it to a higher value. You could do 7 is one of the first values I tried, so it looks a little bit better, I think, a little darker like it would on the bottom. Or you can do something like 20, or even higher than that if you feel it's necessary, until you get a value that more accurately represents what you feel the bottom of the car should look like. You can also play with the strength and the distance if you would like to. And for your glossy shader, you can play with the roughness. You can increase it or decrease it. So instead of 0.2, you could do something higher like 0.5 if you wanted to. Or you can just leave it at 0.2. And you can do similar with the diffuse, change the roughness if you feel it's appropriate. So if we change the roughness of this, you probably don't see a whole lot of difference, but you can play around with this until you get a result that you like. One thing that I forgot to do is actually go down here and make sure that this texture down here, which is our height map texture, should be on non-color data. From here, it's just a matter of tweaking settings, getting things to look the way that you want them, either deciding whether you want to use the height map or if you want to use one of the normal maps instead. You can add in different things like color ramps or whatever else to make changes to how things are looking. I kind of like this one in this case. This looks pretty decent. You typically would want a darker color bottom because usually the bottom's going to get pretty dirty. There's not going to be a lot of light coming into the bottom area, so you usually want it to be darker instead of having a lighter color like the original image. The original images are pretty light in color, so you're going to have to darken them somehow with color ramps like we did in this case, or using other methods depending on what you feel is appropriate. Just tweak the settings, add in new maps until you have what you like. I'm going to try changing this distance to 0.5, and we're going to take a look at this one again, see if that really changes a whole lot. And if you want to, you can go back to the UV image editor, press tab to go into object mode, and you can even adjust some of these points if you'd like to. Like if you think you need to bring some of these up, you can select them, do GY, bring them up, and select some of these and do the same. But it will depend on your own car model exactly what changes you need to make. So that's about it for this tutorial. If you have suggestions on how to make better node setups, definitely let me know in the comments, because nodes are really not my thing. I'm not the best at nodes, so I'm sure some of you guys can come up with a setup that gives you better results in this, and I'd definitely be interested in seeing what you guys come up with. So let me know in the comments, you know, maybe even give me a link to a project that I can download or something, and I'll take a look at your node setup, or just take a screenshot and show me your node setup, show me a better way of doing things. But this is just what I came up with. It looks alright. It passes quick inspection, although it's not perfect. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. And as always, don't forget to save your Blender file. So go to File, choose Save As, and save it. One other thing I wanted to mention is you can actually change this factor from 0.5 to something else, like for example you can change it to 1 and then press enter, and you can take a look at the difference that that's going to have over here. Maybe you like this better, maybe you don't, but you can change this factor as well and get some pretty significant changes in the look of the bottom of the car. So just keep that in mind. Feel free to play around with this value as well as other values. One more thing you can do to get a different result, we'll just look at this result as it is right now. I'm going to change this to solid view, and another thing we can actually do is change the strength of these lights. So if we right click to select this bottom light, you see we have the same strength for all these lights, but we can actually click on this plus value and create a new material, and we can go to edit mode by pressing tab and then click assign to assign this material to this particular light here. And then we can left click on the environment lights, left click here, choose copy material, left click on this new material, left click here and choose paste material. And now we can change the strength from 3 to whatever we want. So we can change it down to 1, or we could change it to something lower than that. This just allows us to change the strength of the bottom light and actually make this a bit darker if that's what we would like to do. So that's another way to darken the bottom of the car, at least in the rendered viewport, is just by changing the strength to a lower value for the light that's on the bottom of the car. And as usual, don't forget to go to File and Save. If you want to go back and change the material for your car, make sure you're in object mode and right click on the car, and that'll bring back your node setup for the bottom of the car, and just do File and Save. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so on patreon.com/StephenBrooks. Thank you for watching my videos, and thank you for your support. I'll see you in the next video.